Basically, the format will be Shabbos will talk for the first 20, 30 minutes-ish in terms of just giving a little background, and then I'm going to do a little back and forth Q&A for 15, and then we'll open it up to the audience for your questions. If you have any questions now, feel free to drop them in the Q&A section down at the bottom next to the share and the show captions, and I will address them at the end when we're ready. So, okay. So I'm very honored to welcome Shabbos Kestenbaum. Shabbos became famous for his suit against Harvard University, in which he successfully alleged that Harvard had allowed persistent anti-Semitic harassment and discrimination against its Jewish students. He went on to speak at the Republican National Convention, the U.S. House Committee on Education and Workforce, the Republican Jewish Coalition, as well as on Fox and CNN about his experience. He has a really broad background in the higher ed space. He was the Hill President of Queens College and graduated summa cum laude from that institution and earned his MTS from Harvard in 2024. He's a prolific writer. He writes on H.com many different great articles, a fierce advocate for in the fight against anti-Semitism, and a spirited debater. Please join me in welcoming Shabbos Kestenbaum.
Well, I appreciate that. I like that line, a spirited debater. That's cool. No one's ever told me that before, so I appreciate it. Well, it's great to be here. I have to admit, when I first got the invitation, I was a little nervous because I thought this was the National Association of Genocide Scholars, which I think I'm a member of, actually, along with Adolf Hitler and Darth Vader. So I think that really underscores the intellectual capabilities of the National Association of Genocide Scholars. And I was very happy to learn that this is not that. This is the National Association of Scholars, which does tremendous work. So thank you for having me. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think you said I'll talk for about 25-ish minutes, and then we'll open it up. So I'll get straight into it. So as Benjamin said, I'm Harvard Divinity School graduate. I went to Harvard really to study essentially religion, and in particular the intersection between religion and politics. I really am not an activist. I was really not looking to make a name for myself. I was really just looking to study. I come from an Orthodox family, so I'm a first generation American. We're proudly Jewish and we're proudly American. I'm one of 7 siblings, which is fairly typical for my community. After high school, I went to all Jewish day school my entire life, and after high school I did what's fairly typical for most Orthodox Jews, which is I then took 2 years to study in the old city of Jerusalem, an all-male yeshiva. I live 2 minutes away from the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Dome of the Rock, the Western Wall. And that's when it kind of occurred to me, I wanted to study religion, but from an entirely different perspective, an academic perspective, a secular perspective, non-sectarian. And I went to Harvard Divinity School, which was the first time I was ever in a classroom with women, with gays, or at least outed gays, with Muslims, with things that probably your listeners take for granted, but for me was actually quite a new experience and something that I was quite taken aback by in a very positive sense. This is something I wanted to do, but no pun intended, it's a fairly unorthodox thing for an Orthodox man who wants to study religion to go to a divinity school, which is why when I was applying to Harvard, I reached out to people in my community, and no Jewish man that I knew of had actually done this. So I was the only Jew in my program. Again, I studied religion, who wore a kippah, who kept Shabbat, who kept kosher. So it was always interesting being the odd man out. But suffice to say, I'll cut to the chase of it. I was on the left politically. I mean, very far left. I voted for Bernie Sanders twice. I marched for Black Lives Matter. I marched at the Supreme Court when Roe v. Wade was overturned. I volunteered for the Jamal Bowman campaign. I was 9 years old when I knocked on doors for then Senator Barack Obama. I was 12 when I was knocking on doors for then Newark Mayor Cory Booker. So even compared to a Harvard Divinity School student, which is also pretty socialist-esque, I was pretty to the left. And I was kind of perplexed then to see how there was a tremendous emphasis on racial diversity, on ethnic diversity, on diversity of sexual orientation. But there was one diversity that Harvard deliberately did not acquiesce to. And this is not just true at Harvard. Unfortunately, it's true of most institutions of higher learning in the United States, particularly the Ivy Leagues. And that was, of course, diversity of intellectual thought, intellectual diversity, ideological diversity, political diversity. And that to me, I found quite strange. And I found that strange quite quickly. So I support Israel, full disclosure, for many reasons that I'm happy to address later. And I also knew that I was in an environment where most people did not support Israel, and most people actually did not support Western civilization, and actually most people did not support American capitalism or even democracy. And that's okay in the sense of I wanted to have intellectual discourse, academic conversations with people from in a wide array of backgrounds, which is why the very first class I took at Harvard was a class called Religion, Nationalism, and Settler Colonialism, the case of Israel Palestine, which was quite a title. And in this class, we were quite literally taught as fact by our professors that historically, the Jew has been powerless. And with the advent of the state of Israel in the 20th and 21st century, the only way the Jew knows how to exert and exhibit their newfound power is, in fact, by internalizing the ways of Nazi Germany, which is how you students can now appreciate why the IOF, the Israeli occupying forces, is so Gestapo-esque in their tactics. And for our final paper, which was worth, I think, 40 or 50% of the grade, I wrote it on Yeshayahu Leibowitz, who's a fascinating figure in Israeli and Jewish history, with an epilogue. And in the epilogue of the paper, I lied through my teeth and I denounced my religious Zionist values that I had grown up with. I had denounced the state of Israel, and it was actually the only paper at Harvard I ever got an A+ on. And it was not a very particularly good paper, I can assure you of that. But I think it really reflects what so many students at Harvard and across institutions of higher learning in the United States feel, that they cater to what their professors want to hear, as opposed to writing and saying and believing what they actually think, which is a really profound problem. So Harvard was ranked by the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expressions, FIRE, a great American NGO, as to how well they protect free speech, how well do they advocate for the First Amendment. They were ranked about 3, maybe 4 years ago, 248th out of 248 American universities when it came to their commitments to free speech. This is not an institution that has a strong track record of advancing intellectual discourse, of bringing in uncomfortable speakers or presentations. In fact, on the contrary, this is an institution that unenrolled 12 admitted students when it turns out they had posted a sexist meme in a private WhatsApp group. This is an institution that routinely disinvites controversial speakers who are deemed transphobic or misogynistic or racist. This is an institution that has safe spaces and trigger warnings and land acknowledgments, which makes it very odd that my first month of being a student at Harvard, and again, everything I'm telling you thus far has been before October 7th, that my first month of being a student at Harvard, the Harvard Palestine Solidarity Committee, which, to be a little politically incorrect for a moment, is the largest compilation of intellectually challenged morons I've ever met in my life, they decide to invite Muhammad El-Kurd to come speak on campus. And for those of you who don't know who Muhammad El-Kurd is, well done, you are not missing out. This is someone who has seriously and openly professed that Jews eat the organs of Palestinians. This is someone who has seriously and openly professed that the Jews have internalized the ways of Nazi Germany. This is someone who has stated, and I quote, "We must normalize massacres." And he posted a video on Twitter, and shout out to my Twitter. If you're not following me, please do. I could use the ego boost since my mom has stopped following me. This is someone who has posted on Twitter that we must, quote, that Zionists, quote, must perish. So the Harvard Palestine Solidarity Committee decided that this is the individual they want to come to speak on campus for the third time. So we go to the Harvard president, or at least the interim president at the time. We go to the Harvard DEI, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion administrators. We go to the top faculty and we say, hang on a second, you guys have a strong track record of disciplining speech you don't like, which I'm actually not in favor of. But nevertheless, that's how the game has been played for decades. Why don't you apply that logic to someone who is so vehemently anti-Semitic? He has quite literally appeared on the Anti-Defamation League's top 10 anti-Semites, which, when you think about it, is incredibly impressive considering how much competition there is to get on that list. Yet somehow Muhammad El-Kurd persevered and he's on that list. And Harvard DEI and the Harvard faculty and the Harvard president, they did something remarkable. They looked at us, they shrugged their shoulders, and they said, well, he has a First Amendment right. What do you want us to do about it? Which is a shocking double standard. It's blatantly anti-Semitic. And as we successfully proved in court, it's actually discriminatory. And that has been the story of Harvard, certainly since October 7th, but really for decades, of having a double standard by which they treat minority students and then how they treat Jews. And I'll just go back and talk about 2 more classes I took very quickly. I took another class at Harvard. And again, if you Google my name, which please don't, but if you do, you'd probably get this perspective that I'm this far right, conservative, MAGA Republican political hack, which number one, I don't know many MAGA Republican hacks who voted for Bernie Sanders twice. But number two, I went to Harvard deliberately to do what a college is supposed to encourage you to do, which is learn from other ideas and learn from other people and engage in intellectual discourse and agree and disagree and debate and have discourse. None of that happened. So I took these classes to challenge me to move beyond my intellectual comfortable limits, but they literally did not do that. So this class was taught by two professors from the previous course. This class was called Narratives in Displacement, the Case of Israel-Palestine. And just as a side note, I was once banned from China. I have an arrest record in Poland. It's probably why I'm still single. And all for good stuff, or for advocacy. And if you were to have spent the last 3 or 4 years at Harvard, you would literally not know that China and Poland were countries, because the only country that is singularly discussed and obsessed over and studied and read is what? It's Israel-Palestine. In fact, the Religion and Public Life Department, which has since been suspended as a result of both our lawsuit and the Trump administration, and the faculty themselves realizing that this is an institution that has so abandoned the ethics and virtues of an institution of higher learning. I mean, it's just entirely political indoctrination. But this organization, the Religion and Public Life Department, they have had more than 75 events on Israel-Palestine, which is more events on a country than every other country combined. Obsessed with this issue. So this class is interesting because in addition to being a regular course throughout the semester, they actually take you to what they call Israel, to what they call Palestine. I say it's what they call Palestine because the Palestine they take you to is like Ben Yehuda Street, which those of you who know Israel is like in the center of Jerusalem and is not in any way considered occupied. And it's a very competitive course because it's Israel-Palestine. Every Harvard student wants to go and you have to apply. So I apply for the course and I get an interview. And the professors, who again already knew me, they said, you know, Shabbos, we've never had someone like you apply before. And I did not know if they meant because I wear a yarmulke. I did not know if they meant because I don't believe in nuking Israel off the map. And I had said, yes, it's so important I go on this trip because in my insular Orthodox community, I'm not allowed to discuss Palestine, which of course is nonsense, but that's what my professors wanted to hear. And they said, well, I kid you not, that's how the conversation went. They said, well, we're really concerned. I said, why are you concerned? They said, well, we're concerned because if we take you to Palestine, which again is like Ben Yehuda Street, and we show you, this is all before October 7th, we show you the genocide, and we show you the apartheid, and we show you the settler colonialism, and we show you the ethnic cleansing through the process of unlearning, which is a term so monumentously dumb, only a Harvard academic can come up with it. You will be so psychologically traumatized. You will not be able to reassociate yourself back with your Jewish day school, back with your Jewish synagogue, back with your Jewish summer camp, back with the Jewish community, because you'll have realized for 25 years they have been feeding you a diet of lies, and we as your professors don't want to be held responsible for that psychological trauma, so they rejected me from the program. I'll tell you one last class. This class was called Religion and Peace, the case of, if any of you have been following along, you should get this, the case of Israel-Palestine. And the professor gets up on the first day of class, and this is the same professor from the two prior courses, and she says, in politics, in media, in academia, the Zionist narrative is the dominant narrative, which is laughably absurd. And she says, therefore, in order to understand both sides of the story, we in this class, which again is called Religion and Peace, the case of Israel-Palestine, will not discuss, will not study, will not learn, will not read any texts if they were written by Israelis. So when people ask me my reaction to anti-Semitism at institutions of higher learning in the United States, my reaction is relatively succinct, but it's also relatively consistent, which is I am shocked, but I'm certainly not surprised because this is the inevitable outcome of decades and decades of political indoctrination masquerading itself as intellectual discourse and academic worth when it is literally nothing other than a deep-seated hatred of the Jewish state and obsession against the Jewish people. So in the interest of time, and I am timing myself, so don't worry, we'll be out of here in due course. I have a timer. I will skip ahead to October 7th. October 7th was the joyous Jewish holiday of Simchas Torah and Shmini Atzeres, one of the happiest days of the year. I'm an Orthodox Jew, so I don't use my phone on Shabbat or any of the holidays. We don't use any electronics. And we're at Harvard Chabad, which is the main institution of Jewish life on campus, and we're dancing, we're celebrating, we're drinking. It's funny, I speak to a lot of high schoolers, so I say we were drinking lots of water, and at least it looked like water. And all of a sudden we hear these rumors. There was a stabbing, no, there was a bombing, no, there was a shooting. I don't know to what degree your listeners, I know they're far more intelligent than I, but let me just quickly explain the geopolitical reality in Israel in case those aren't aware. The reality of having a state of Israel in the 20th and now 21st century is terrorism happens, and it is actually a frequent thing. So as I mentioned, I lived in the old city of Jerusalem. Our rabbi was actually stabbed to death by a Palestinian terrorist outside of Jaffa Gate a number of years ago. There was a stabbing of a 12-year-old Jewish boy by a Palestinian terrorist about 2, 3 doors down from where I lived. So when we heard that there was a terrorist attack, we were bothered by it, but in an almost sick, cynical way, as young Jews, it's par for the course. Yeah, there was a terrorist attack. I'm sure there'll be another one tomorrow. Again, given that we're not on our phones, we don't really know what's happening. And the problem was, as the night went on, the rumors persisted, the rumors strengthened, and it became readily apparent that what we young Jews were experiencing was something we had never experienced before, which is Israel as an existential issue. Israel, where its legitimacy, its survival, and yes, its actual existence is now a question mark. So I was 5 years old during the Second Intifada, which was the largest mass period of terrorism against the Jewish people since the Holocaust, where buses were blown up, schools were blown up, hospitals were blown up by Palestinian terrorists. So when Zohar Mamdani, for example, is not able to condemn the calls for a globalized Intifada, you can understand why Jews are somewhat trepidatious. But anyway, I was 5 years old. I don't remember it. I was not alive during the first Intifada. I was not alive during the Lebanon War. I was not alive in 73 or 67 or 1948. I relate to Israel very differently than my parents and grandparents. Israel is a place where I go to study. It's a place where some of my siblings and grandparents live. It's a place where I go for Passover break. Maybe I'll move there when I'm older, but I don't call or question its legitimacy in the same way I don't call or question the legitimacy of Spain or Portugal or Ireland. Well, maybe we should question the legitimacy of Ireland. That's a different story. And all of a sudden, on the night of October 7th, we were faced with a very different reality where actually, no, the Israel that our grandparents spoke about that fights for its survival is now the Israel of our generation too. And the story of October 7th, and I often say this and people get very frustrated, but it really should not be controversial because it's quite obvious. The story of October 7th is not the story of October 7th because Hamas is a dictatorial, tyrannical regime that should be obliterated from the face of the earth. But they are very clear as to what their goals are. I mean, you can read their charter online in English. They call for the eradication of the Jewish state from the river to the sea. Hassan Nasrallah, the since deposed head of Hezbollah, he has stated for years, it would be great for all the Jews to pack up and move to Israel. Because in his own words, it would be so much more convenient to kill you in one location than having to hunt you down country to country. So when terrorists commit acts of terrorism, it is bad and we should respond. But definitionally, they are terrorists. It is what they do. The story of October 7th is the story of October 8th. What do I mean by that? Because as my classmates and my professors and my friends at Harvard University on the night of October 7th, as they were watching the images in real time on live TV of Jewish women like Naama Levy bleeding from their private areas, as they were watching the images in real time on live TV of Jewish babies like Kfir Bibas and Ariel Bibas being hoarded onto motorcycles by strangers and being driven into Gaza, as they were watching the images in real time of mangled, charred bodies in cars, the immediate reaction of 34 student groups at Harvard University, from the Feminist Society to the Muslim Student Association, was to jump out of bed, some were still in their pajamas, to draft what they called an emergency statement to blame Jews for the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. It's not hyperbole, it's not speculation, it's not conjecture. The statement literally begins, quote, "We hold the Israeli apartheid regime entirely responsible for all ongoing violence in the Middle East." You know how many times these students condemn or even mention Hamas? Zero. In fact, there's a great documentary you should all watch. Free on YouTube. It's called The Crisis on Campus from PBS Frontline. And they interview me and I give them my shtick. And they interview 3 of the leading anti-Israel activists at Harvard University. And these are 3 girls at Harvard Law School. And the director asks them, this is in April of 2024, given the hurt, given the blowback, given the controversy elicited by your statement, do you regret not condemning or even mentioning Hamas? And these 3 girls look at each other and they do this. No, we don't regret it. We didn't think it was relevant. We didn't think it was relevant. I hope you can appreciate what I tell President Trump, what I tell Democrats and Republicans, although mostly Republicans these days, in the House and the Senate, what I tell the national media, what I'll be telling Piers Morgan on Monday morning. This is not like a Jewy issue or an anti-Semitism issue. This is an issue that strikes at the core of our Western civilization, the heart of our American democracy and our classically liberal values. Because when you can have the alleged best and brightest of a given populace, a given society, a given campus, who can see in real time the murder of 45 Americans and then the abduction of more than a dozen Americans, including one who was buried this morning. more than 2 years after October 7th. When they can look at that and then they side with the terrorists who did that thing, then that is a profound problem and is a profoundly and uniquely American problem. Because yes, they call for the death of Israel, but they also call, take it from someone who's heard it, death to America. Yeah, they took down all of our posters of the Israeli Jewish hostages. They also took down all the posters of the American hostages, like Keith Siegel and Omer Nutra and Hirsch Goldberg Poland. And yeah, they stole our Israeli flag, sure. They also stole our American flags. The flagpole that I planted on Harvard's campus with a massive American flag was broken in half. So why do we care about Harvard and Columbia and Penn and UCLA and all these institutions of higher learning? It's because, unfortunately, these are institutions of higher learning that purport to train the next generation of American leaders. And by and large, they're kind of right. It's not an exaggeration at all to state, statistically speaking, I probably sat in a room with a future president, a future senator, a future congressman. And if these are America's future judges and jurors, if these are America's future policymakers, if these are America's future authors of the books your kids and grandkids are going to read, then you'll have to pardon my French, but this underlines the severity. America is fucked. This is a profound problem. And the fact that the elites, the best and brightest, are the ones who are propagating this underscores just how severe this problem is. The Religion and Public Life Department, where I took all those crazy classes, they released their own statement on October 10th or 11th. And they begin their statement by saying, you know, the great Palestinian poet once said, which is an odd way of starting the statement. And they go on to say, if you begin the story on October 7th and not the story of the 1948 Nakba, and not the story of the ethnic cleansing, and not the story of Jewish supremacy and the illegal land grabs, you'll only get one side of the story. You know how many times these professors condemned Hamas? Zero. Where do these students get their brain dead ideas from? They get it from the professors. I'm sure you'll ask me about Qatar and the foreign funding, and it's a good question. We should talk about it. But it's not exactly rocket science. When you have professors who tell their students, we are going to cancel class, but so long as you live in a tent and call for an intifada and follow people on their way to class, we'll give you full credit. It's not a crazy coincidence that students go on and do that thing. Which is why 2 days after October 7th, there's a rally at Harvard University of more than 1,000 students and professors. And they have their masks and globalize the Intifada and glory to the martyrs. And one particular student gets up by the name of Kojo. And Kojo actually just finished a fully sponsored trip to communist Cuba, where in his own words, he will, quote, take lessons of the revolution and impart them on college campuses. He speaks to the Harvard faculty and students, and he says Hamas, which is the only time Hamas was ever mentioned, is not a terrorist organization. We will look upon them as freedom fighters. Who are we to condemn the resistance? And you know what the reaction is of America's best and brightest? Thunderous applause. Not one thinks to condemn, to challenge, to walk out of that statement. It's not a coincidence, therefore, that a week after that, an Israeli Jewish student was physically assaulted on Harvard Business School. And by the way, the two assailants, one of them, who was the editor of the Harvard Law Review, was just awarded a $65,000 fellowship by Harvard Law School to intern at CARE, the Council on American Islamic Relations, which has well-documented ties to actual terrorist organizations. The other assailant was given the honor of being class marshal at graduation. It's no coincidence that 2 weeks after that, a Jewish undergrad at Harvard was spat on for wearing a kippah. It's no coincidence that a month after that, an Israeli student was told by her professor to leave the classroom because her nationality made others uncomfortable. It's no coincidence that 2 weeks after that, a Harvard employee vandalized all of our hostage posters, writing on Kfir Bibas, quote, his head is still on, where is the evidence? Writing on Noah Argamani that Jews are best friends with Jeffrey Epstein, who then challenged me to debate him in a secluded underpass as to whether Jews orchestrated 9/11, and then posted a video of him waving a machete with a picture of my face saying he wanted to fight. He's coming after more than blood. He's coming after the Zionist mafia. I had private armed security outside my house for a week. I had a guy with a gun follow me to religious services at Chabad to make sure I was okay. And of the dozens of phone calls and emails we sent to Harvard inquiring about his employment status, to this day, they have not once responded to us. It is inconceivable that any other minority group would be treated with the disdain, the disregard, and the contempt that Harvard has historically, routinely, and consistently treated its Jewish student population. And to me, I can forgive all of that, although maybe I shouldn't, but I can forgive all of that. The one thing I won't be able to forgive and forget are the encampments. Remember the encampments when all those students lived in tents for 4 weeks and refused to shower? It smelled terrible. It was like a dangerous combination of BO and communism. Forget about the fact that they violated all time, place, and manner restrictions. Forget about the fact that they called for an intifada at all hours of the day for 3 weeks at Harvard University. Every time I, a visibly Jewish student, walked to class, cut through Harvard's campus, cut through Harvard Yard, every time I did that, classmates of mine who were leaders of the encampments. They called themselves safety marshals. They set up their own security perimeter on campus. They put on bright yellow vests, and when they would see me approaching, they would take out their phone, they would start following me, they would start recording me. And I would ask them why. I would ask them to stop, and they never responded. And the last week of the encampments, the National Lawyers Guild, which celebrated October 7th, they gave the students notepads so they could write down which room the Zionist agitators were studying in. And we told the president of the university and the president of the United States, but he was mentally incapacitated at the time. We told the president of the university that Jews were being followed on their way to class. Not only did the president of the university, Alan Garber, never respond to us, he actually told the encampment leaders, if you agree to pack up your tents, we will allow you to meet with the Harvard Management Corporation that oversees Harvard's $50 billion endowment to discuss divestment from Israel. If you agree to pack up your tents, we will allow you to meet with the senior Harvard faculty to discuss the establishment of a Palestinian Study Center. If you agree to pack up your tents, of the hundreds of students and professors who took part in the encampments, you know how many were suspended or expelled or disciplined? Zero. You know how many times I've been able to meet with management corporation or senior Harvard faculty? Also zero. But if you call for an intifada loud enough, and if you follow Jews on their way to class long enough, and if you vandalize enough private property, at one point the encampment leaders tried using bolt cutters to break open the locks on Harvard's gates. If you do all of those things, says Alan Garber, you will be given a seat at the table, and we will listen to your concerns. Which is why we filed a lawsuit against Harvard pertaining to their obvious civil rights violations against Jewish students on campus. Harvard's response, tellingly, was not to apologize for their behavior, was not to recognize the reality of anti-Semitism, was not to come to the negotiating table. They filed a motion to dismiss with prejudice, meaning they were asking a judge not only to toss out our lawsuit, but to set a legal precedent so that no Jew in the future could hold them accountable for anti-Semitism. We filed an amended complaint, an update to our lawsuit to reflect the increasing acts of anti-Semitism. Harvard's response the second time, exact same thing. No apology, no recognition, no negotiating table. And it pisses me off to no end that Jewish students, American students, need to be doing this. But our judge, Judge Richard Stearns of the Federal District Court of Massachusetts, he issued a 25-page scathing ruling last July against Harvard, writing in part, quote, the facts as pledged show Harvard failed its Jewish students. He tossed out Harvard's double motions to dismiss. And we actually became the first case in American history pertaining to the civil rights violations of Jewish students on a campus to actually be allowed to go to trial. It never happened before. And currently, there are half a dozen cases brought by American Jewish students across college campuses in this country who have actually cited Kestenbaum v. Harvard as legal precedent, which means if your kids or grandkids make the mistake of going to these universities and propagating these institutions, at the very least, they will have their constitutional protections afforded to them. So the fight is not over. There's still a tremendous amount of work to do, but we are fighting in the court of law. We're fighting in the court of public opinion. We're fighting in academia. We're fighting in media. We're fighting in social media. We're fighting through the White House. And I think what this president has done has been extraordinary as it pertains to combating the moral rot at these universities. And I guess my time is up, so I'll leave it at that. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay. Wow. Thank you so much, Shabbos, for that. It's very brave, I must say, what you've done and what you're continuing to do on college campuses and just in the regular political sphere. My question actually initially was um, okay, so we have just before I get into my questions, someone's asking more slowly, what is the name of the lawsuit you filed against Harvard?
Kestenbaum v. Harvard. I think if you just Google that, you'll be able to read all of the motions and all of the documents themselves. Just type in Kestenbaum v. Harvard court case.
Okay, cool. Yeah, my initial question was all of this is that you very well articulated the how, basically, the way in which universities pressure students and via their faculty, and the way in which all of this anti-Semitic activity happens on campus. Um, but I was wondering about the why. Like, why do you think that this is allowed to go on? Why do you think that, like, what ideological underpinnings are allowing professors to propagate these notions to exclude Jewish students?
Yeah. So it's a good question. First of all, I just wrote in the chat the full name, Kestenbaum v. President and Fellows of Harvard College, which sounds a lot cooler. So you can just Google that. In terms of the why, I think there are a lot of A lot of different answers. First of all, a lot of these universities are run by the radicals. I mean, the inmates truly run the asylum here. Many of these professors, especially the tenured professors, were the ones who were the radical students in the 60s and the 70s protesting Vietnam, burning their bras in public. And they kind of just stayed in academia, which also helps explain why so much of academia is so far left, because most of their ideas have never really been tested outside of the isolated hallowed halls of the Ivy League. At Harvard University, for example, 97%, this is not me saying this as a conservative, you can just Google this yourself. The Harvard Crimson polled the faculty, and it showed that 97% of the faculty identify as liberal. And at the time, I was a liberal, but even then, I knew that it is really dangerous for the health of the university and the health of a democracy to have 97% of the professors agree on one specific ideology. So part of it is because, as I just said, they were radicalized and they never really left the university. The other part of it is the foreign funding, which I do think plays a tremendous role. 20 years ago, there was a student at Harvard Divinity School named Rachel Fish. And Rachel discovers, by total happenstance, by total luck, that Harvard Divinity School received a $3 million donation from a vehemently anti-American, anti-Western, anti-Semitic, Emirati slash Qatari think tank. And the money was to establish an endowed position in Islamic studies. And the quid pro quo was, we'll give you the money and we get to decide which professor will hold that chair. So the foreign funding is a major issue. Another major issue are the foreign students, not all foreign students, obviously, but those who don't share American values. So there's a great article you should all read in the Wall Street Journal about Harvard is roughly 25 to 30% foreign student, roughly. At Harvard Kennedy School, it's roughly two-thirds of the students. And of the two-thirds of the students, a third of them are from China, and they are affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party. In fact, this is the Wall Street Journal article. There are so many CCP, Chinese Communist Party officials at Harvard University that they literally call the Harvard Kennedy School, which is the School of Government and Public Policy, quote, their party school. I remember actually, I took a class at the Kennedy School on religion and politics. It was a great class. And on the first week of classes, we introduced ourselves, what is our background, and one of the students, I don't remember his name, but he said that he did data analytics for the Chinese Communist Party. And everyone snaps their fingers, oh, so interesting, so cool. And I'm like, hang on a second. You worked for the Chinese Communist Party collecting data. You are saying this publicly, and now you are here at the Harvard Kennedy School learning with the best and brightest. It was shocking. So the foreign money, the wrong types of foreign students, the professors themselves, and perhaps most fundamentally, the explosion, especially in the post-George Floyd backlash of diversity, equity, inclusion, which does not differentiate people based on intellectual abilities, academic merit, but based on whiteness or lack thereof, based on homosexuality tendencies or lack thereof. It creates a binary classification of peoples whereby you were either oppressed or an oppressor. And Jews, certainly American Jews, have the misfortune of being mischaracterized as white, which is why if we have the misfortune of being mischaracterized as white, which is why you can show my classmates the most horrific images of October 7th, and it will literally not sway them in any meaningful way. Why? Because as my classmates and my professors will tell you, resistance is justified when people are occupied. There is no evil that Hamas or Hezbollah or the Houthis or anyone can do, because we as white people are inherently the oppressor class. And I think that explains so much of this. And the other example I would give is Luigi Mangione. Luigi Mangione, of course, was the University of Pennsylvania graduate who shot and killed the United Healthcare CEO, a father of two, Brian Thompson, in broad daylight. And every single age demographic in the United States condemns that as an actual assassination, because that's what it was, with one glaring exception: 18 to 24-year-olds. 18 to 24-year-olds are more often than any other age demographic in this country believe that that was not an assassination, that was justified. Because if you are a victim of the oppressor class, you can do literally whatever it is you want to rid yourself of that victim state. And that is so dangerous and so destructive. And we have seen real world consequences of that poisonous ideology.
Makes a lot of sense. And the DEI anti-Semitism study that we're doing would hopefully reveal more of these ties. But this also brings up another question and another point that I was considering in terms of your story. You said you were a Bernie Sanders voter twice over. And then I know also that you voted for Trump though as well. So you can speak to why this DI ideology is maybe so attractive and why in spite of that it's important to advocate for dismantling it or making it so it's not so virulently violent in a way, right?
Yeah, well, first of all, maybe I should have said this. I'm totally biased here. My kippa is Trump 47 Jewish leadership. I worked on the Trump campaign. We were part of, I was a founding member of what was called the Jewish Voices for Trump. And I voted for Trump not because I agree with him on all the issues. In fact, I actually disagree with him on most of the issues. I believe in strong measures, for example, to combat climate change. I believe in a $15 minimum wage. I believe with certain restrictions, a woman's right to choose her reproductive health. At the same time, I also believe we can't talk about any of those issues if we are dead. If American Jewish students are being physically assaulted on their campuses, if American Jews are being held hostage by Hamas in the terror tunnels of Gaza, then yeah, the climate change stuff is nice and the abortion stuff is nice, but it literally pales in comparison to existential issues. And when your house is on fire, you may not like the fireman. The fireman may have cheated on his wife or maybe even his taxes. You may disagree with the fireman's politics, but literally, who cares? Because he is the only one with a bucket of water. And I went obviously I spoke at the Republican convention, but you guys can watch my speech. It was not even 5 minutes long. I don't even endorse Trump in that speech. I don't, because even then I didn't want to vote for him. And I went a few weeks later to the Democratic convention and I said, don't have me speak because I'm a MAGA fascist, right? I gave them a list of a dozen progressive American Jewish students on their campuses who've experienced anti-Semitism, who will probably support Kamala Harris anyway. And I told them, have one of them speak for 2 minutes and I'll connect you. I literally told them, don't allow the Republicans to be the only ones to talk about anti-Semitism. And they said no. I was at the grave of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who is a revered figure in American Jewish, or really the Jewish world. I was at his grave on the 1 year anniversary of October 7th with Ben Shapiro, with the family of Idan Alexander, who was the American being held hostage by Hamas. Thankfully, he was released as part of the Trump ceasefire plan, and with President Trump. And we went to his grave to pray for the American hostages. You know who was invited? Kamala Harris. And you know who said no? Kamala Harris. I testified 3 times in front of Congress. And every single time I testified, I never once made it clear my political allegiances. I complimented Republicans as much as I complimented Democrats. But it's hard to forget how the ranking member, Democrat Congressman Bobby Scott of the Education Committee, used the hearing to criticize American Jewish students for only focusing on anti-Semitism, which is odd because when I was part of Black Lives Matter, anytime someone would say all lives matter, we would say true, but right now we're focusing on Black lives because they're the ones being, systemically oppressed or whatever. It's hard to forget when I testified in front of the House, I think it was Judiciary Committee or Oversight Committee, the ranking Democratic member, Congressman Jerry Nadler, using the opportunity to criticize us Jewish students for testifying and then literally falling asleep. So I didn't force the Democratic Party to do any of those things. They did it to themselves. And if the Democratic Party wants to win elections in the future, which I'm not convinced they do, but if they do want to win, they have to treat American Jews in the same way they treat Black Americans, in the same way they treat gay Americans, in the same way they treat female Americans. Grant us political concessions. Tell us what you're going to do for our community. And if the answer is nothing, that's your prerogative, but then we're not going to support you, which is why whether you hate Donald Trump or love Donald Trump, it's a great thing that Donald Trump received 35% of the American Jewish vote, which is the most votes of any Republican nominee since Ronald Reagan. It's a great thing that he got 45% of the New York Jewish vote, 40% of the Pennsylvania Jewish vote, roughly 40% of the Ohio Jewish vote, because it shows that if you want to win elections, the Jewish community is not a monolith. You have to actually compete for our votes. And it's a lesson that Republicans certainly learned, and it's a lesson that Democrats need to learn, should they want to remain competitive in the future. I have to be honest, I don't remember if that addressed your question. I think I may have went on a political tangent, but if it did not address the question, maybe try again, and I'll try to answer it more forcefully and clearly.
No, I think it pretty much addressed the question. I was also I was basically interested in your journey, maybe a little bit more internally about your
Oh, I
decision
see.
making process, about how you decided to go from one spectrum to the other. But I think what you articulated clearly addressed that to a good degree. But I also have to follow that up with the perhaps obvious, which is that Zoran Mamdani just won, and
Well, yeah. So I, as someone who, even though I'm still a registered Democrat, I have a love-hate relationship and I kind of want them to lose elections. So as someone who kind of wants them to lose elections as the current party they currently are, then absolutely they should welcome in Zohar Mamdani. They should call him the future of the party. They should put more DSA members on national tickets. Look, The story of Tuesday was not Zora Mamdani. It was Abigail Spanberger and it was Mikey Sherrill, who won in larger numbers than Zora Mamdani, and they won as pragmatists and as moderates. Sure, Zora Mamdani won in a city where Democrats outranked Republicans, what, 9-1? This is not a person, this is not a ticket, and this is not an ideology that can be replicated on a national scale. Americans reject extremism on both sides. So the Democratic Party, and let me add one other thing. I'm concerned not about Zora Mamdani because we've always had socialists, we've always had radicals, we've always had extremists. I'm concerned about Zora Mamdani in the sense of the adults in the room, the alleged moderates. They acquiesced and they surrendered to Zora Mamdani. Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, endorsed Zora Mamdani. That is insane. Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, and obviously a congressman from New York, endorsed Zora Mamdani. That is insane. And the conservative movement is having this fight now in the open as to what is the future of the conservative movement. But at least they're having the fight. And at least there are people who have balls to say, you're not a conservative, you're not a Republican. If you believe that we have to imprison all blacks and we should rape women whom we disagree with politically, and we should shoot Republican legislators who don't vote the way we want, then you're not a Republican and we don't want your votes. At least the conservatives are having that argument out in the open. I just spoke last week at the Republican Jewish Coalition, and I denounced Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes, and most of the other speakers did too. Where is that fight on the left? Where is that fight in the Democratic Party? They don't fight because they've surrendered. They've surrendered to the Zora Mamdanis. And if that's the way they want to go, I am telling you, you can bookmark this. They will lose the midterms and they will certainly lose the presidential election in 2028. Americans reject Zora Mamdani. He actually won the fewer share of votes when you compare it to Kamala Harris. She got far higher votes, far more votes in the presidential election than Zora Mamdani got. And it's not because of low voter turnout. I mean, Zora Mamdani got a lot of votes. He got more than 1 million, which is the first candidate, I think, since the 60s to get it. But if you compare Zora Mamdani to all the other elections that happened on Tuesday, the real answer was pragmatism and moderation won. And Zora Mamdani is a blip because, yeah, New York City is a big blue liberal city. So don't read too much into it.
Okay, good to know. So I actually have a question that's a little bit perhaps a departure from our conversation, but I'm curious about it because it seems like it's a very important part of your personality, who you are. Faith. You've said that Christian faith is very important in the same way that your own Jewish faith is very important. So I'm wondering if you can speak to that and maybe speak to that on college campuses in terms of visible representations of Judaism in a
Sure.
house.
Well, let me first say, and I don't know why the neo-Nazis on Twitter get so mad when I say this. So let me say it as clearly as I can. I am Jewish first, and I base my politics on my Judaism. And Christians should be Christian first and base their politics on their Christianity. And America would be a much better country, if more Christians went to church. And America would be a much better country if more Christians read the New Testament and the Old Testament and actually lived a life in accordance with the teachings of Jesus Christ. And America would be a much better country if the Mormons, the members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, went to the temple services every month far more often than they currently do. So America was founded on Judeo-Christian values, and I think part of the or one of the manifestations, or one of the explanations, I should say, of the problems we are facing today is way too many people have strayed from that, which is why Gen Z will be the generation to save America. Gen Z, for the first time in recorded American history, is actually more religious than their parents. That has never happened before. Usually, the farther you get and the younger you get, the less likely it is that you identify with a religious tradition. The less likely it is you are affiliated with a church or a synagogue or a mosque or elsewhere. And Gen Z is bucking that trend, I think, in large part due to the assassination of Charlie Kirk. But America would be a much better country if more Christians were religious and if more Jews were religious. I talk about anti-Semitism on college campuses because I'm a Jew and I experienced anti-Semitism. But let us not forget that Christians are being discriminated against and being targeted and being scorned and denigrated for their faith. I don't know in the same numbers. I don't think that's true. But nevertheless, they are still being targeted for their Christian faith. And we as Jews have a particular responsibility to speak out against that discrimination and that targeting of our Christian friends and of our Christian neighbors. So Christians and Jews are in this fight together. I truly believe, I was at Biola University yesterday, and I said this to the professors, that Jews in the United States today have no better friends than Christian Americans. They are our allies, they are our friends, and we must recognize that. And shame on the American Jewish leadership who still have hesitations or trepidations to create allyship and coalitions with people who really just want to pray for us and want what is best for us. So.
Great. Yeah, great. I think that really did answer the question. So just have one more minute until let me see about the Q&A. Okay. If anybody has more questions, please drop them in the Q&A. Otherwise, I'll ask another question until that happens because I don't see any more questions than one. So I'm going to wait a little bit for that to happen. Another question that I had, well, basically, let me just tell you that I saw your debate with Jackson Hinkle and I found it endlessly amusing, especially the fact that you compared him to a folding chair. I guess I'd never seen that before in a debate.
Yes, and actually, we did a second debate 2 days ago. I was in Vegas, and he was, of course, stuck in his bunker in Moscow. And I opened the debate by saying, "Jackson, I have to apologize because in our previous debate, I said you have the intellectual capabilities of a folding chair. I meant no disrespect. I want to apologize. I did not mean to offend folding chairs."
Yeah, that's hilarious. I like folding chairs. I do. So yeah. But I wanted to ask you more about the implications of that, right? Because you were basically going up against somebody who has a very extensive online presence, but you were also saying that that was perhaps a detriment, perhaps making him. Look, what's the effect there? Is it the fact that he has an online presence that dumbs down his own rhetoric, or is it the fact that he has dumb rhetoric that allowed him to have the online presence in the
Well,
first?
well, I'd say Jackson's probably not a good example of this, and this is true in general. Twitter is not a reflection on real life, as Ben Shapiro always says. People need to go out and touch grass. The majority of the American people don't have Twitter accounts. Not only that, but 2/3 of all Twitter accounts are not actual people; it's foreign bots. So very often you're not actually arguing with people. With Jackson, the only reason I accepted the debate is because he's so intellectually challenged, it would just be such an easy opportunity for me to demonstrate it. So it was really a no-brainer. It took 30 minutes out of my day. It's not like I was doing much in the office anyway. So there was really no thought process other than this guy is so demonstrably dumb. I would be stupid not to express that and showcase that. I think the broader question and the broader predicament is this. Piers Morgan, he's a good example. He has more weekly listeners than there are Jews on planet Earth. He just does. I remember, I think it was God Sod, I think. He was on Joe Rogan's show and he asked Joe Rogan, "How many Jews do you think there are in the world?" And Joe Rogan said, "A billion," with a B. And God said, "A little less, try again." And Joe Rogan said, "Okay, 500 million, right? 500 million." And the answer, of course, it's 15 million Jews. Even though Jews have been around for more than 3,000 years, we are one of the smallest religions in the world. Although the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints started barely 150 years ago, there are already more Mormons than there are Jews. So Piers Morgan has more weekly listeners than there are Jews on planet Earth. For us to surrender that space, for us to acquiesce and placate, I think would be tremendously short sighted and it would be foolish. And even though I don't like being yelled at on his show, especially I'm in LA, so we film it at like 6 a.m. The first thing I do when I wake up is I get called a baby killer. I don't particularly like that. And I think his show does placate to the lowest common denominator in our political culture. At the end of the day, that is where political culture is found. That's where discussions are being had, and that's where ideas are being fomented. So it would be foolish to not have I like to think of myself as a rational, moderate, pro America, pro West, pro Israel voice. So I think it's in our best interest to have I don't mean me, but in general, we have to have young, competent, rational speakers who can defend all of those things go on hostile media, because if we surrender it, we will be worse off as a result.
There's definitely there definitely needs to be more figures like that, more figures like you, and more figures who are balanced. I would think of one other person, Zahava Feldstein, whose presence is really great on online, and she's been doing a lot of great work. But okay, trying to turn back to questions. Anyone else have more questions? I will ask this one question, but I would really love if people could ask more questions in the Q&A so that we can get this a little bit more rolling. So just drop your questions in the Q&A or in the chat if it's better for you.
Well, they just all agree with me, so no one has any questions.
That's right. You were
Question is
so
Shabbos.
clear.
Question is Shabbos. How can I support you? I'm glad you asked. I have a nonprofit, so everyone be in touch with me later. Thank you.
You have a nonprofit. What's it called?
It's called the American Jewish Students Foundations. You can all donate to me and help me keep complaining on TV.
Forcefully complaining. Yes.
Forcefully complaining. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'll ask the one question in the chat, and maybe by the time that I ask it, other people will have more questions to follow up with it. Okay. So this is coming from Paul Erickson. How do you respond to free speech fundamentalists who argue that academics who celebrate October 7th should face no consequences? Their rationale is that they are opposed to all speech codes.
I think there are two ways of responding. Let me talk about the universal approach and then the particularities of your question. The mainstream media has concocted a narrative, a fictional narrative, whereby we can either protect American students or we can protect free speech, but we can't do both, which is ludicrous for a couple of reasons. Number one, institutions of higher learning like Harvard, like Columbia, like Penn, for decades have had speech codes. Now, I actually believe there shouldn't be speech codes, but nevertheless, they do have speech codes, and they're very insistent on said speech codes. Yet, bizarrely, the only exception they ever make to speech codes is when it's being used to propagate anti-Semitism. So we're not really against free speech, we're against the double standards and we're against the hypocrisy. If Harvard does not want to have speech codes, I would be in favor of that. And people should be able to say the N-word, and people should be able to call for a globalized intifada, and people should be able to say racist and homophobic and Islamophobic remarks, because the only way to combat bad ideas is with better ideas. That's what Charlie Kirk told me. But college campuses have literally never done that. They don't operate that way. They operate on the assumption of safe spaces and trigger warnings and the like. And so what I call out is the hypocrisy. That's number one. Number two, if you read our lawsuit, for example, almost none of it has anything to do with speech and has everything to do with action, has everything to do with violence, has everything to do with criminality. So this bizarre notion that Jewish students are targeting free speech, when if you actually read our complaints, they have nothing to do with speech of someone said free Palestine and it made me uncomfortable. No, it has to do with you blocked the goddamn library and wouldn't let Jewish students enter. You smashed windows through our dorm windows. You stole our flags. You physically assaulted us. That is what we are contending with. But for whatever reason, the mainstream media does not want to focus on that, which is why our judge, again, Judge Richard Sherns of the Federal District Court of Massachusetts, a Bill Clinton appointee, he literally stated in his ruling, quote, it would be dubious for Harvard to hide behind the First Amendment when A, they have no track record historically of protecting the First Amendment, and B, our complaints have nothing to do with the First Amendment. So that's number one. In terms of number two, why should professors who celebrate October 7th, for example, be disciplined? It's not the celebration of October 7th. It's not the specific words that they say. It's if we are an American institution, we have certain beliefs and certain principles that we do not compromise on. We believe in the West. We believe in the promises and the virtues of Western civilization. And if you don't believe in that thing, we're not targeting you for your free speech. Work anywhere else, but you're not coming to Harvard University because we actually like living in America. In the same way that I am not silencing someone's speech if they roll around in mud. Let me give you an example. If they roll around in mud and feces, and then they come to my dinner table and they get offended that I don't want to sit next to them, I'm not canceling them. I'm simply saying, I don't want to be associated with you. That is my right. And I'll close by saying what I said about the RJC. Refusing to engage with people who say that blacks should be imprisoned and women should be raped and Jews should be sent to the gas chambers, refusing to engage with them is not engaging in cancel culture, it's engaging in common sense. And conservatives used to know this, which is why William Buckley, when he got rid of the John Birch Society, was hailed as a pragmatic conservative voice. So people will remember the name William Buckley. They will certainly not remember the name Kevin Roberts. So that's what I would say as it pertains to universities. If you want to start a university where you believe in radical Islamism, and importing the third world and desecrating American values, go for it. Start that university. But you are not going to hijack an established university that has been around longer than this country with your third world idealism. And in terms of Ruth's questions, what's the link for your organization? I just Googled it and couldn't find it. You are not going to find it by Googling it. It only exists
through our IRS, whatever. If you want to help me out, just email me, shabboskestenbaum@gmail.com. I will gladly send you the links whereby you can donate to our organization. So thanks.
Great. So there was basically a compliment in the Q&A. Shabbos, have to jump off the live stream for meetings. This is from Christopher Monday. Thank you for restoring courage. You have my respect. So you've been complimented. They admire you. Yeah, okay. I guess I'll just ask another question in closing because there's not more questions. What do you say to the people who basically I'm still interested in this defense of liberalism and this defense of wokeism that people basically advocate for, right? Like, because a common thing is saying we're not anti-Semitic, we're just anti-Zionist. We're not, we don't advocate for classical anti-Zionism. We advocate for Israel to change or be different or not exist, and that should be protected. And but clearly clearly to me, anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism are wedded. So what's your take on that? Just to close off.
Yeah, it's probably a good point to end. So I do debates a lot, and moderators, when they want to appear intelligent or when they want to appear edgy, they'll say, I don't mean you, I'm saying like, very far left or far right nefarious actors. They'll
Right.
say, I don't get it, Shabbos, because the criticism of Israel is not anti Semitic, right? And I'm like, I have been Jewish my entire life. I've been Jewish since my first breath. I have literally never met a Jewish person on planet Earth who has ever once said that criticism of Israel is anti Semitic. I don't know where this idea came from that to appear intelligent, you have to say, yes, it's not anti Semitic, because no one actually believes it is anti Semitic. I don't know where this nonsense came from. However, where we do push back, and this is to your question, is anti Zionism. Why? Because as an Orthodox Jew, I pray 3 times a day. You know what direction I face when I pray? Just like Jews have been facing for 3,000 years? Jerusalem. You know what we mention in our thrice daily prayer dozens and dozens and dozens of times, more than ending world hunger and more than bringing the Messiah and more than global peace? We mention Jews returning to Zion. It is impossible to open a Hebrew Bible or a Jewish prayer book and not find any type of explicit or implicit references or notions of Jews returning to Zion. Almost the entirety of the Jewish calendar revolves around things that happened in the land of Israel. The Jewish story is about Jews, the Exodus, leaving Egypt and going into the promised land. Jews have lived in the land of Israel uninterrupted for 3,000 years. We have been in Israel since before Muhammad was even born. So when we say anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, what we mean is to negate the historical, the blatant, the religious attachment that Jews have had with their ancestral homeland is in fact anti-Semitism, because what you have done is you have negated a core central tenet of our religious expression, of our Jewish identity, and you have said that's actually not true. In the same way, you would not tell a Catholic that I don't believe in communion. Communion is abhorrent. It's a religious, and I'm not anti-Catholic when I say it. No. Catholic is an essential part. Communion is an essential part of Catholicism. Israel is a central part of Judaism. I don't necessarily mean the state of Israel. I certainly don't mean the Bibi government. I don't mean the contemporary politics of the state of Israel, but I do mean the historic and holistic attachment that Jews have to Zion is unquestionable. And anyone who negates that, not only are they trafficking in anti-Semitism, they are also trafficking in ahistorical nonsense that has no basis in reality.
Very great. Very powerful. Okay, so there's a yeah, okay, fine. You answer that. The email is in the email is in the chat to reach out to Shabbos. There's no link because it
There is no link. There's
no
no Google. I
link.
will send you the link in my email.
Send the link in the email, reach out that way. Saunders, I guess, is also recommending a book for us. It's called The Case for Western Civilization by Dr. Andrew Bernstein in the Objective Standard 2024. I guess it's not a book. I guess it's an article. So if you want to look that up as well, that could relate to this. But I really appreciate Shabbos. Thank you for coming out today. It was a really great session. I think we covered a lot of ground, and you made clear a lot of things that for people I think struggle with a lot. So that's really a good. You're doing good work, and I just want to commend you on that. Thank you everyone else for coming as well. Everyone who attended today, really appreciate it. Hopefully you can catch the next one. I'm planning on having a webinar when the study on DEI and anti-Semitism is released. So
All right.
thank you.
Thank you all.